about, like, a bunch of, like, crazy, silly things. Like, yes, Seinfeld episodes are just crazy. They're just silly. Some petty, some are just, again, dumb luck. And then there's always, like, that's such a Seinfeld moment, a bunch of inside looks. The stall episode is full of all that. I can't tell how many inside jokes are referred to from this episode. From, can I spare a square, to, the male bimbo to Tony, hunky Tony, and you love him, the whole man crush stuff. It's just hilarious, and so many comes from this episode solely, and it's just, dang, another reason why Season 5, Disc 3, like, there's a couple, like Season 4, Disc 3, Season 5, Disc 3, I would say maybe Season 3, Disc 3, like, there's certain discs on, like, the Seinfeld DVDs that stand out to me, and this is another one of those episodes that just stand out, like an episode that I cannot pass up. That's just hilarious in all sorts of matters. Let's talk about it. There's a lot to talk about for this episode. So, the original idea, the main storyline with the stall, is, what will happen when Elaine and Jerry's girlfriend Jane finally meet each other and realize who each other are. Because the first time they met each other was unknowingly in a stall, in the bathroom, without knowing. And Larry Charles got the idea because he mentioned how, again, there was some bathroom issues working on set for the show, with him, just like him, without really asking much permission, using the executive's bathroom or whatnot, which led to the story about George getting George quitting his job back in the Revenge episode, whenever he got a memo for using the executive's bathroom and whatnot. And of course, he then eventually heard also a story through like a Dear Abby about some exchange with the two women arguing between stalls about toilet paper, which that's something that isn't really done much on TV. A conversation between two different women in stalls in a bathroom. So the idea was, of course, that Elaine was in the bathroom at a movie theater, and she realized there was no toilet paper. So she's asking the woman, who happens to be at the time, she doesn't know, Jerry's new girlfriend Jane, and she asks her if she can spare a square. And Jane was one of those girlfriends, like, she was very similar to Jody, whoever it was, from the masseuse episode, where she seemed like one who kind of like wore the pants in the relationship, but unlike Jody, I didn't understand why her and Jerry were together. Jane, I could still see her and Jerry, being a couple, even though she kind of had that like bratty witch, I everything's my way type, attitude, like some snob, like I'm never wrong, and just very, just basically just like a snobby witch. But I could still somehow see her and Jerry still clicking, in a brief relationship. But of course she was saying like, no, I can't spare a square, and she refused, and she ran out of the bathroom. Well, of course, at the time, Jerry and Elaine knew that each other were going to be there, but they didn't find each other. Jerry was with Jane, and Elaine was with her new boyfriend, Tony. Uncle Tony. We'll talk about that shortly in a second. But of course, they're both venting to their men about, what happened in the stall. But again, they don't know who it is. And then of course, Elaine's like, where's Jerry? I gotta meet his new girlfriend. I'm dying to meet her. And then, Jerry, same thing, is like trying to find Elaine, but they never found each other. So Elaine then sees Jerry the next day, and she tells him the story about the bathroom until Jerry realizes, it's, he's trying to keep both of them apart because Elaine said she memorized that flinty voice. It's tattooed in her head. At the same time, Kramer is in Jerry's bedroom saying he wanted to use Jerry's phone, and Kramer's been calling some phone sex line. And he's going to be some guy named Andre talking to some woman named Erica. And they even pick up the phone as I think Jerry went to make a call, or Elaine went to make a call. I can't remember who she was calling, but she picked up the phone. You hear them talking on the other line, and then Jerry gets on the phone and says, "Hey Andre, get off the phone." Imagine like the grown man telling his kid, get off the phone, because he's tired of Kramer using his phone to call those phone sex lines. But then Elaine starts talking about Tony, and then a couple minutes about the episode, Jerry rolls to a car and goes, "Yeah, Tony, hunky Tony," and like mocking him. And he says about he's a male mimbo, he's a bimbo, and he's trying to convince Elaine that she's only with him because of his looks. And Elaine's denying it, but anytime a problem came up, all she kept asking was, "What's wrong with his face? How's his face?" Basically, it was the face or nothing for him. Although there was a deleted scene where it kind of changes a little bit to me on my perspective of that. We'll talk about that at the end. But then they mentioned that George was actually at Monk's with Tony, and they said I think he has a little bit of a man crush on him. And at first you're thinking like, "Oh, George, George's so fearful." Like back in the outing when that reporter wrote the episode that Jerry and George were with each other, and then of course back in the Note episode where George was afraid of that his massage from a man turned him on. Now all of a sudden you see George in Monk's as Tony's talking. He's like looking like he's a freaking god, and George is like turning his hat around at like Tony, and he's like acting like Tony's like the best guy ever, and he's saying how like need to go bowling sometime, and then Tony's like, "No, what we gotta do? We gotta go rock climbing," which George obviously it's like, okay, I'll do that, but he's obviously Jason Alexander in real life said that in real life he has a tremendous fear of heights. So he was a little bit afraid of this episode, but of course the way it was shot, we'll get to that in a second, made up for that. But at the same time, George was like, "Oh God," he's like, I'm obviously scared about this, but he obviously wanted to be friends with Tony because he was like, he had a man crush on him and wouldn't even admit it. Kramer though came by at the same time, and then Tony asked Kramer to join him, and which made George mad. Later at the apartment, well, first off, speaking of masseuse, Jane was at the apartment with Jerry, and she gave Jerry a massage, and he said some line where he said, "I've been waiting on this for a while," obviously referring to whenever Jody wouldn't give him a massage back in the masseuse episode. But Jerry also is asking her to tell him about this job she does, and she says it's nothing really good. And eventually she did say, well, in the last scene, "I sell paper products, you jerk." Well, that's gonna come back to bite you big time. But anyways, but she was there, and then when Elaine was coming up, Jerry was worried because Elaine said she memorized that voice of hers, and then so Jerry gave Jane some gum, saying her breath smelled a little garlicky. So she was chewing on the gum when she was talking to Elaine. They were introduced to each other, they seemed to get along well, but again, there was obviously Jerry's trying to hide from the fact that if they find out who each other are, they're going to kill each other, and Jerry's trying to keep them far apart from each other as possible. So then Kramer came in, and then George came in eventually, and then George was all upset because Kramer decided to join them for rock climbing. And then George is just like raving about how much he likes Tony. He's such a cool guy and everything. And then Jerry's like, "Cool guy? What are you, like 8th grade?" And then Kramer starts saying stuff, and then Kramer doesn't understand why George is getting all upset about it. And then Kramer just goes, No, I think you love him." And then George's like, "What? No, it's not like that." And he goes, No, you love him." And then of course he starts asking Elaine stuff about like what does Tony like. He wants to bring some sandwiches on the trip. And he's like he's most excited about is bringing sandwiches to make Tony happy. So it's like, why wouldn't people think you have a man crush on him? A little bit of a side story here. Another like kind of that's another like kind of like inside joke between my family and I. We always refer to Seinfeld as that because it was probably about 4 years ago. I went to a wedding for a friend, and it was the first time that I got to meet my sister's best friend's boyfriend, now husband. Right now, they just got married last summer, and I came home from the wedding and I was telling my parents the story about how I met Joey, and Joey and I hit it off pretty good. We talked for like 2 minutes when we first met, and we both like baseball. And within the first 2 minutes of talking to him, he offered to buy me a beer. And I told my parents that. My dad literally started pulling a Kramer. No, I think you love Joey. And ever since then, it's been I apparently have a man crush on my and I never told this to Joey, even though Joey's kind of like teased me a couple times about it. But we told Steph's best friend that, my sister's best friend that, and my dad always jags him saying that I love Joey. And I still remember the first time Joey came over for a game night, and I was talking to him. I remember it was I see my dad like kind of like peeking his head around to see him like his peripheral vision. He was like literally like hidden behind Joey's head from like where I was standing and how far away he was. I see my dad just go. And like one of the last times that they've come over, I said hi and gave him a hug. And as I gave him a hug, I said over to my dad. I was like, but it's always comes back to no, you love him, and it's all because of this episode with George having a man crush on Tony. So where was he? Where were we? So they go on the rock climbing trip. And Kramer was dangling from having a good time. George was like holding onto the wall for like dear life, freaking out. Which again, Jason Alexander says he was tremendously afraid of heights. But the way this was shot, obviously, was at a rock wall at the studio and around like a blue screen and whatnot. Michael Richards says that he wished he would have gotten a little more physical comedy into this with like him getting tangled in the ropes and whatnot. But Tony had not started climbing up yet, so he'd thrown his rope up for Kramer and George to tie his rope for the harness for him to start climbing. Tony then asks George, do you got anything to eat? And of course George is like, yeah, I got some sandwiches. I brought you, I think it was tuna because I know you don't like peanut butter or vice versa or whatever heck it was. But he's like George is more excited about the sandwiches and pleasing Tony than that. But in the midst of him doing that, he doesn't hold onto the rope, and the rope gets loose, and Tony falls and has a bad accident. How Kramer and George got back down, I don't know, because they were stuck up there. But they got back down. But Elaine found out about Tony falling, and of course, first thing she says, like, "What happened to his face? What happened to his face?" And then, because of course, once again, she was denying that that's all she cared about was his good looks. She runs off to go see him. Kramer, though, had received... Well, of course, Kramer and George were mad at each other. And then Jane had actually called, though. But when Kramer picked the phone and said it was Jane, he said her voice sounded familiar. Later on, though, when they were in the apartment again, Kramer and Jane meet. And Jane goes, with this big smile, goes, "Hello, Kramer." And then Kramer's like... Phew. And she offers to split a cab with him. They're both going uptown. He's like, no, I think I'm fine. That's good, He's like, acting all weird. What's wrong? As soon as Jane leaves, Jerry Jerry's like, what's wrong? And then Kramer's like, Jerry, that's Erica. He's like, oh, what, the phone sex lady? Like, no, it can't be. He's like, Jerry, that flinty voice, it stands out. And then, of course, Jerry's like, what's up with this voice? Like, it's well... It stands out, but again, he doesn't believe Kramer that she's Erica. So, in the last scene, they're at Monk's. Well, first off, Elaine goes to see Tony, whose face is all bandaged up, and, she's worried about what's going to happen to his face after the bandages get taken off. She thinks he's going to be as good looking as he was. George tries to come by to apologize to Tony. He brought him comic books, but basically, um, George tells Tony to back off, and basically doesn't want to be friends with George anymore. And George is like all heartbroken over this, and then Elaine locks him out. Well, in a deleted scene, shows like probably was going to be the last scene, maybe after probably the ending scene after what happened in Monks at the end, which I'll get to that in a second, where Elaine and Tony go rock climbing not long after Tony gets the bandages off, and his face still looks great except for a little scar right here. So Elaine's cool with it. But then Tony sees a pimple on Elaine's face, and she's like, "Yeah, it's just a pimple." He goes, "Oh, I don't. That's not good for me. I gotta back off. You gotta back off, babe." And he basically breaks up with her in the middle of the mountain. So Elaine obviously only wanted to be with Tony because of his good looks, like came back to bite him, but it didn't make the final cut. But it was a deleted scene on the DVD. But in the last scene, I think Jerry and Elaine were at Monk's. They were supposed to, I think Jerry, and then they see Kramer was there. Kramer was at another table, and he said he made a date with Erica, and he wants to prove once and for all that it's Jane. Well, sure enough, here comes Jane walking in, and then Jane sees Jerry and goes to the table and says, "Hey," and then he goes, "Hello, Erica." And she's like, "Erica, what are you talking about?" And he goes, you and your job selling sex on the phone, selling sex on the phone, and she's like, I sell paper goods, you jerk. Well, paper goods don't come back to bite her because then Elaine recognized her voice, and she said, "Do you have a tissue I can borrow?" And Jane goes, "No, I can't spare one." And Elaine realizes who she is. So Jane says she has to use the bathroom. Elaine, though, gets up and bolts right past Jane, goes to the bathroom. And then Jane's just like, "What the heck?" So in the bathroom, it's the same shots from earlier in the episode at the movie theater. So Jane's like, "Oh, damn," and then Elaine's like, "Something wrong?" And she like wiggles her toes, and then Jane's like, "There's no toilet paper over here. You should check, but could you by any chance spare some?" And Elaine's like, this very like in your face voice, it's like, "I can't. I don't have it. I don't have a square to spare. I can't spare a square." And Jane's like, "Hey, wait a minute. I know you." And then Elaine's like, "That's right, and I know you." And she was running out. She'd taken all the toilet paper in just a few seconds from the other stall just to prove a point, and she runs free. So Elaine's like, bam, that takes care of that. So obviously this is the end for Jane. It's like, like the big green-eyed monster finally getting slayed. She comes out and basically just a submissive feat. She walks up to Jerry and goes, "Don't call me again." And she starts walking away, and she sees Kramer sitting in the chair, sitting across from Jerry, and she gets in his ear and goes, "You either." And she walks away. Both their jaws drop. They realize she, in fact, was Erica, the phone sex lady that Kramer had been talking. Her reaction was priceless. Oh, this was such a good episode. I love it. Again, so many inside jokes between "I Can't Spare a Square," the Tony, Uncle Tony, the man crush stuff and everything. Oh, it's hilarious. Oh, it's such a funny episode. Of course, like I said before, the shots of like the rock wall, those were all taken from a rock wall on the exterior, at the studio. Also, apparently, even though they shot a scene with the two stalls in Monk's, apparently Tom's Restaurant, the real restaurant in New York that they used for Monk's, really didn't have two stalls in there. They were just like a single person bathrooms in there. But this is such a good episode. I loved it. The material put together was just hilarious. Like you said, I can't spare a square, and you love him. But of course, I forgot to mention when George went back to the apartment, Tony told him to go away. George was like, "No, Tony, don't do this to me. I brought sandwich." Oh gosh, again, I love this show. I love this disc. I love this episode. I think the next episode is also really good too. I can't wait to talk about it. I think it's The marine biologist, I think, is next. Oh man, we're gonna have a lot to talk about there. That's gonna be good as well. Guys, that is my thoughts on the stall episode of Seinfeld. What are your thoughts on the stall? Can you spare a square? And maybe ever jag you out, you having a man crush on one of your good friends. What are your thoughts, guys? Leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. Be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAir93. Telling guys I'm checking out. I'll catch y'all later. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, before I go also, Julia Louis-Dreyfus also has said in interviews that apparently she can't go to the bathroom anymore in a public restroom without being asked if she can spare a square, which at times makes her a little uncomfortable, but forgot to throw it in there. But that's it, guys. I'm checking out. I'll catch y'all later. I'll see you guys in the next review, which is for the marine biologist, I believe it is. And I'll catch y'all later. Have a great rest of your night. Well, day. It's still afternoon at the time of recording this. Peace out, everybody.